just got no energy to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, coming to church, it's a lot more stressful on me getting ready than it is actually being in church.
Well, and Jeannie has said a lot of times. So one of the reasons that she has said that you're able to make it here a lot better is because we have it later than what church is. So, it's like you struggle in the early mornings.
Right. And I don't have to dress up a whole lot.
Yeah, well, you don't have to worry about that, church. You can. I don't think anyone would have an issue with that. Okay. I think we're ready. So Ecclesiastes 3, we're going to hit that real quick, and then we're going to go to actually Ecclesiastes 12, and then we're going to get back to Kings. So um, I think we could go more in depth in every chapter, but I think at some point it might as well just get to the chapter 12, which is what sums up all his feelings, all these things that are empty, meaningless, worthless. And so we'll flip screen. And so the very last part of chapter 3, in fact, these Bibles, they got headings. Now, I'm going to reiterate this, but I'm sure y'all know this. These are not obviously, written by, Solomon.
Yeah.
Likely author of Ecclesiastes. Solomon didn't put on there a time for everything, from dusk to dusk. Those have been put up by the translators. Right. So English Standard Version put these, titles up. Now, if you have a King James Bible, it's got titles too, but it's going to probably say something a little different. If you got a New American Standard or American Standard, it's going to have a title, and it's going to probably be slightly different. May be the same, but it won't always be the same. Because the translators put that on there. Much like, when Solomon wrote this, he didn't say, oh, I'm going to start chapter 3 now. This is going to be verse 1, chapter 3, then verse 2. Man later came and put these, standardized the chapters and verses. And it's really greatly synced to the Textus Receptus, or the authorized version of the way they compiled the scriptures. And so, your chapters and verses were set up back in that time when they started wanting to print Bibles out. And so as a result, like there are some verses that the modern manuscripts, or the oldest manuscripts, they don't include certain verses. And so you'll see just a gap in verses now, and a few of those where that happens, because they were set up, and you don't want to change things. I personally think translations, especially modern translations, I like the English Standard. I like the American Standard was really good back in the day. The New American Standard I don't like as much as the English Standard. English Standard, yeah. So, but there's pros and cons with translations. So when we were growing up, what was the only, even though now by then you had the American Standard 1901 edition, and you had the Revised Standard. But if you went to any church building in the early 70s, even in the early 70s, what translations did everybody have? It's King James. So the preacher's up there saying verses, and if you were quoting verses, or if you were memorizing verses, you were memorizing the King James. So it was great for that, because everybody's on the same translation. It's easy to, when you memorize, everybody memorizes the same thing. But now with all these translations, it gets a little tougher, because you have to make sure they understand where you're going to use this translation to memorize from, but there's other translations. So, when I was back in the day, when it was a lot of people was really wanting you to try to memorize verses, it was important that you got it exactly right. Well, it gets really tough now when you got multiple translations now that, one or two words may be just slightly different in, the New King James from the English Standard. And it's like, so it's it's created a situation where I don't think people memorize scripture like they once did. But I do think there's benefit. So why I switched from the King James, I started out my preaching. In fact, I've got the Bible in there. You can see, I did a lot of notes in the Bible. Anyway,
I did.
and so, but I used the King James back in the day in my first full time experience. And it was a more, well, I really shouldn't say conservative congregation. It had a lot of older members also at the time, and they were well versed. And so that was probably still the majority translation that most people there used. But I found myself at some point, I would spend probably 2-3 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes, explaining not what Greek words meant, not what the text meant, but I'd have to explain what a certain word in the King James meant. Because it's words that, although you can look them up in dictionary and you can find their meaning, they're not the way we use them. And so, or we don't use them hardly any. And so some people call them archaic. I don't really consider them that. It's just that they're old words that is a bygone era. And so, I found I'd have to explain some of these words, like there's a word in, Acts 2 where Peter says, save yourself from this, in the King James, it says froward. And you know what froward means? Most people don't know, but most of the modern translations translate it much better what we understand, crooked. Save yourself from this crooked and perverse generation. And so crooked is actually better. The Greek word, in fact, if you tell the Greek word, is scolios, which is where we get our English word scoliosis, which my daughter, actually both my daughters have it. One had it real severe. Scoliosis is where your spine is crooked. And so it just simply means crooked is what the word means. But froward is a good word. You know what froward means? If you look it up in a dictionary, if you got an exhaustive dictionary, you know what it's going to say froward means? Crooked. So, and there's a lot of words like that you
let have a different.
A lot of the words had different words, and even like and I've had some people say, "Well, my Bible says charity; it doesn't say love." You sure that's right? So now that one can be explained. Love is what we would think of that, but charity. So, people give charity now for different reasons. They may want the tax write-off. They may, whatever, but, charity in the King James time, it was something that was a selfless gift. You just gave it. In fact, a lot of times you would give it. You didn't even want people to know about it. Well, now people that do charity, they want it documented so they can take it off their taxes and other things. But in the King James time, it was a gift you gave that you didn't even want anyone to know who gave it. It was just a pure gift. And so the word in the Greek is the agape, which is this selfless love. And so I understand why they did charity, but most people today don't associate that word charity with what it actually means. Now, sometimes our English is insufficient because we use love a lot of different ways, and it is talking about that selfless love. But anyway, so I first went to the New King James because it was close to the King James, but a little bit better as far as getting some of those words out. I like the English Standard because I believe that we can't stay behind on some translations. Well, I like the King James. My favorite was always the American Standard 1901, but it's not practical, and it deals with languages. Language is always changing, and our language has really changed a lot in the last 100 years. And if we stick to things that predate that time period, the younger people are not going to. It's going to be way too much. You might get the occasional, vocabulary nerd that is really into it, but for the most part, it's not what people are going to use. So of the two that I see as candidates for future, you have the NIV, which I believe is insufficient in some areas, and you've got the English Standard. English Standard does word for word, try to retain some of the beauty, and I think
got a new NIV.
Yeah, they seem to get worse and worse, in my opinion. So, you know, well, let's talk about. So, one of the worst things the NIV did is came up with this word called sinful nature. Now, when you hear sinful nature, what does that almost imply to you?
It's like prostitution and killing, stealing.
Okay. But the way the NIV presents it, we all have this sinful nature. You killed anybody or
No.
been prostituting yourself? So what does it mean in the context of the NIV? Now, I'll tell you what the word, it's sarke, okay, in the Greek. And you know what the Greek word means? Flesh. So do you have flesh? Some of us have a lot more flesh than others. Larry doesn't have enough flesh sometimes, I think, but sinful nature, and the thing is, if you research who translated NIV, so what false teaching are they prescribing to? Have you ever heard of Calvinism? You ever heard of inherited sin? So we inherit sin, so we've got sin in us. We've got a sinful nature inside us. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the flesh. So we have flesh and we have spirit. Okay. We also have a soul, eternal. But we have flesh, spirit. So this flesh, it likes things, right? You know, it likes certain things. It likes, a lot of some things are neither good nor bad. I mean, you might like ice cream or good old barbecue. I like both of those things. Air conditioner, yeah, it likes to be, kept at a, controlled temperature. But there are a lot of things about this flesh that it would like, but we know would go against God. And some things that we would like, but God has said this is the way. In other words, like marriage, and other things. There's sex and everything. That's for married. Anything outside of marriage it's forbidden. Our flesh wouldn't care. Our flesh would probably like that, whatever it is. But the point is, we choose to be led by the Spirit, which is what we read about in God's Word. We make that choice. It's not that we have nature, it's that our flesh would definitely, for a period, probably like sinful things. But the flesh is neither good nor bad. It's what we're led by that becomes good or bad. So it implies something that it's not. It implies in that sinful nature. And so people that, a lot of the bigger proponents of the NIV have always been people that believe in this, that we inherit sin and, we all have that. We need the Spirit to overcome our sinful ways, not in the way that we just read the Bible and we do what God's Word says. So anyway, that being said, I think we need to use a translation that's going to be good for a while because language is always going to change. And so it's going to require translations and updates and other things. I also like the English Standard because their copyright is totally different than the others. So why do you think now, like I say, I think they've gotten worse, these new, NIVs and stuff. Why do you think they come out with a new NIV translation about every 20 years or so?
Those new words. That's all simple.
It's more basic than that. Like I say, sometimes they do, but it's more basic than that. Economics. So who owns the NIV? Zondervan. So if they print a new edition out, what do some people do? They buy it.
Fine.
I need a new one. Yeah, hey, I want to see what this one's like.
That's a guy thing that has his version of the Bible out with
Now that's different.
translation.
Yeah, now that's different when you do that. Yeah, that's a little different. But so King James doesn't have a copyright anymore. American Standard 1901 doesn't have a copyright anymore. So you could freely print those out. There's no copyright. English Standard is new enough that it has copyright, but they allow you to reproduce as long as you don't modify it what the scripture says. So you could use it in, like if you was doing a Bible, you could use the English Standard. You don't have to have their permission. People that use the New King James, which I know a lot of groups that do that, they have to get permission from, let's see, King James it's out of Nashville. I forget the name of the company now, but I think they've changed their names. But so a group out of Nashville owns the New King James. So if you want to do any kind of use of the New King James, more than a verse or two or things like that, you've got to get their permission. If you do the NIV, you've got to get permission from Zondervan to reproduce anything because it's about the money of it. English Standard doesn't do that. They don't do that. So I like that better. I like the fact that it's copyrighted, so you can't just say this says this or whatever. But the fact is, you could reprint whole chapters if you wanted to. So I just like that philosophy. But the best translation is probably the translation you'll read the most, and all translations have problems. So I've always been a little humored by these King James only people, and because it's like I could take you to King James to some things where they've messed up, and they'll be like, oh, it's like yeah. So we know about all them. Well, it doesn't take much in today's age to figure out where the problems of any translation are, or where they've maybe made a mistake or two. The biggest mistake King James did was put the word Easter in there. But they also put the word pastor. You wouldn't have preachers called pastors today had it not be for the King James, because no other translation translates that word pastor. You know what every other translation translates it as? Shepherd, which is what the word is. So you'd have maybe people going around shepherd, but you can't do that because that's an elder. Wait a second. And then it's like, oh, wait a second. You mean the preacher isn't a pastor? So anyway, so there are some problems so these translations sometimes do lead to, error. King James also mistranslates John 3:36 as well, because they do belief and unbelief, but it's belief and basically willful disobedience. So it puts a different spin on it. It's not. So there's a lot of things, and King James is great. I mean, it was probably the greatest translation ever, but it's not perfect. There's some flaws in it. There's some incorrect things. So you've got to. The good thing about the day and age we live in now, though, you can check anything. You can pull up the Greek, you can pull up the Hebrew. You can pull up things that tell you what they say, and you'll have to touch your fingers. So
They got the program called Logos Bible.
yeah,
And you can open up all different versions of
yeah. If you got the money, though, they'll take it. I know a lot of preacher friends that have that. It is an expensive software when you start adding everything up.
It was $300 something.
Yeah, just for the base, and then if you want every translation you're gonna have to pay more. I use eSword, which has the same things. Might not be as glitzy, but it has the same things. And the base of it, the core of it, is free. And
You can pull up like the King James or English version. And
yeah,
you can pull up all those and have them following
yeah,
your reading.
it'll even read for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-oh. That's you. He killed it. Uh, or in our vernacular now, you 86'd it. It's another. So, but anyway, yeah, no, eSword to do all that too. Logos you pay a lot more for, and but a lot of people use it, but it's not cheap. It's
You
not
get
cheap.
dictionary with it,
I get dictionary of mines too.
concordance.
Yeah, I get all that. Yeah,
All
yeah,
that kind
all that. Yeah,
of
and
library of
yeah,
books.
and on eSword, most of it's free, whereas Logos you pay for everything. So, I'm just yeah. So, but it does the same thing. There are other things to do it too, but some of them cost a lot because they're a money making business. That Logos, which is fine.
Do any of you follow YouTube on Roku?
Yeah, I've got my home and even this one. I've got
Okay.
yeah.
Here, last, I don't know, several months, I guess, I've been seeing on Roku, YouTube, where they list these churches will lead you to hell,
Yeah, well, that's recommendation. That's videos. Yeah, yeah.
and the Mormons.
Yeah, the traditional little C cults. Yeah, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh Day Adventist. Yeah. It's usually the little C cults that
they list the Methodists. Some of them have listed the
Methodists. Yeah. Oh, now they're getting somewhere.
Well,
we know what issue they're dealing with, and that we know what hot topic issue they like, right, and on the Methodists.
What all they tell you about these different denominations.
Yeah, most of those. Now, reason you're getting those, just to give you some explanation. So you watch our services a lot on your right, and so everything now has got an algorithm, and they even have AI now in them. So it has seen that you watch that. Right. So it, in its logic, is trying to find you. It's programming that is in connection with that. So, not that it's horrible that it does that, but just always take what they recommend as a grain of salt, because it's some computer somewhere trying to figure out your mind, and sometimes it does okay, sometimes it's going to do a lousy job. So
if you ever watch a certain kind of a program,
you're going to get a bunch of them. You're going to get a bunch of them. Yes. Well, it's to, plain and simple, it's to increase your viewing time. Okay, on YouTube. So, and I will say this, of all those type things, YouTube and Netflix do the best job of trying to, and it's probably if you look at the amount of streaming, YouTube's number one, Netflix is number two. They do the best job of figuring out what you like. And so when they do recommended, the trick or what their goal is, they'll have something you're recommended when you come on there, and it's like, oh, I want to check that out. And then I want to check that out. And if they've done a good job, you trust those recommendations. If they do a poor job, you don't. So to me, YouTube and Netflix, they do the best job of getting in your head and figuring out things you like. It's a little scary how they can do that. But anyway, well, let's get to, so from dust to dust. When you say something from dust to dust, what are we generally talking about? Or where are we at?
From dust you came, to dust you return.
Yeah. So where's that usually said?
About Adam.
Well, it is, but when we hear it today, where are we usually? Where do we? Huh? Funeral. Funeral. Yeah, we generally hear it at a funeral because it puts into focus. You didn't start off. You started off lowly. No matter who you're born to, a baby. How much can a baby do on their own? Can't even feed themselves. Can't change themselves. Can't do that. So you're dependent. You're very humble, whether you think about it or not. You don't remember it, but you're having to depend on everything when you're first born. When you die, you return to that state that you came, dust to dust. And so, and from the sense, in a way, Solomon is analyzing these things, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're wise, whether you're foolish, whether you've, have kids, a bunch of them don't have any, whether you do this or that. Guess what? You started out as dust. Where do you end up?
And end up the,
You end up dust. So, a lot of people, they put too much stock in what's going on while you're on this earth. And we don't put enough stock in, well, this is pretty short, really. What about when we go back to dust? That's really going to be the important thing, because that section of our lives is eternal. It's not just a short period of time. So, Ecclesiastes 3:16, moreover I saw in the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. You read about things, it's, it just hurts me to no end when I read about some preacher maybe I knew of, and he's guilty of this or guilty of that, and you're like, it just hurts to hear that. And then, about all the bad things in this life, but verse 17, I said to my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said to my heart, with regard to the children of man, God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. What happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so the other. So even like, dog, we say that dog is inferior to man, and obviously it is. But what happens to that dog? It goes through its life and it dies at the end. There is a difference, but it's after the death. But, same thing with man. We're going to be born and die. Solomon's talked about the fact that at some point, no one will even have memory of you on this earth, but God will.
seemed like he kind of bugged Solomon, because despite all of his riches and all of his position and everything, he knew that he was still going to die, just like the crazy man.
Yes, and the thing is, so many more people need this view of things, and it's why I saw Ecclesiastes is such a great book for people today, because you get out of high school, maybe you go to college, and you get out of college and you begin your career, okay? And your goal is, I want to make a bunch of money. I want to have a big house. I want to have nice cars. And then you get to the family raising time, and you want to have, you want their lives to be better than yours. And so you give them all these things and stuff, and on and on it goes. And before you know it, you're elderly. You know your time on earth is fleeting, and you can look back. Well, what really did I accomplish? Our value set, especially in the U.S., I think, is too much on things. What things have I accumulated? What things have I, bought? What things do I have? How much better off than I am than my neighbor? How can I one up them? And so much of society is based on that. Kids, when they go to college, a lot of times it's like, okay, what thing makes the most money? That's what I want to do. Then they find out they don't like that. And, anyway, it's just a whole thing. And so, like Solomon, at some point, you're going to realize, what good did it do me? When you're lying on your deathbed, you're not going to think back about, well, boy, wasn't that a nice car I had when I got out of college? Wasn't that a nice house I once owned? Whatever. You're going to think about, am I okay? Have I lived a life that's going to be pleasing to God? Obviously nothing else ultimately will matter. Ecclesiastes 3:20 says, all go to one place, all are from dust, and to dust all return. Just nothing but dust. And so at some point, by the way, that first time we read about this is not from Solomon. Job says some similar things, but in Genesis 3:19, after sin was introduced, God gives the curse to man, tells what man's going to be cursed with. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So We see at the very beginning, this is the way. So anyway, we'll go on from Ecclesiastes 3, and we'll get to let's see. Let's go ahead. There it is. Let's go ahead and go to Ecclesiastes 12. Just a brief introduction. Make sure my screen is right. Yep, it's good. Okay. So Ecclesiastes 12 now, and so Solomon goes on, and by the way, you can see all the like in chapter 4, evil under the sun. Chapter 5, fear God, the vanity of wealth and honor. Some people, that's what they live for: wealth and honor. Prestige, getting awards and everything. The contrast of wisdom and folly.
You're not going to skip Ecclesiastes 10, are you?
I'll get verse 2. Yeah. Keep the king's command. Those who fear God will do well. That's a good principle there. You fear God, you're going to do well. Man cannot know God's ways. Death comes to all in chapter 9. Enjoy life with the one you love. Now, I like that one. Sometimes we miss focus. So sometimes in all this, he gives you something that's important. Why do we worry so much about what someone we don't really doesn't like us, and we don't really enjoy being around them? Why do we worry about them when we need to spend time with the ones we love? The thing I'm thankful for is when both my parents died, they were surrounded by family. They were allowed to die in peace at home, and they were with the ones they love. And I think it's a lot more comforting when that's the case. But in your life, why do we worry about these things when we need to focus on the people we love and that love us? And that's why, I encourage people, your best friends can be people from the church, because they care for you in a deeper way than the world's going to care for you. They care about your soul much more than, just whether or not you got a raise at work or anything like that. All those are good, but, enjoy life. And then chapter 10, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Now that's true. It doesn't take much. You missed us. We had an invasion in here. We were combating flies left and right. And, I said, I've never seen so many flies till I moved to Arkansas here. Seen more bugs in other places, but flies I've not seen. And Dale's theory could be right. It's from the chicken farms. It could be. I'll tell you what, we've got a farm in town called Sweet Tea Farms. It don't smell like sweet tea in the summertime.
The greatest concentration of flies I ever saw,
I bet
where they affected people directly. We lived out on Highway 217. We had a rock chimney, and birds had come there and built nests in that chimney.
Yeah.
And evidently some of them had died. But that chimney was just full of those big old green flies.
Well, then your favorite verse. Let's get to your favorite verse now. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 2. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Now, it's good fodder for today, but he's not talking about politics. We can point to it's just a kind of an expression that was used. So the right hand was always the favored hand. You look at where's Jesus? He's at the right hand on the throne of God. And a lot of that's there was a lot of superstitions about left-handed people.
Left-handed has always been
That's a little different. It's not the norm.
Looked at as different.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this. Of course, I'm left-handed, so I'm an expert on it. Uh, although yesterday at the reception, I saw more left-handed people. Steve and Jennifer are left-handed. Did you know that? Kelsey. Uh, uh,
My daughter is.
yeah. And so we have a lot of left-handed, but from probably the beginning of time till now, about 10% of the population are left-handed. And so that's so you look a little suspicious at that guy that's left-handed. That's not right. And when you were fighting in battle, everything was geared towards the right-hander. So so it just kind of became a thing. I do point out, when so my generation is probably the first generation. They didn't give you too hard of a time if you was left-handed. It's talking about teachers. Before my generation, a lot of times the teachers, they say would, if they saw you writing with the left hand, they would make you write with your right hand. So I never had that. In fact, my parents assumed I'd have to be right-handed because everybody was right-handed in their family. And I get to first grade and the teacher says, he's left-handed. And they was like, really? And I said, yeah. And so sure enough, of course, my dad's like, oh, man, he could be a good pitcher or, whatever, good in baseball. So, but anyway, so I was left-handed. And so they always speculated that with the coming of my generation and further generations, that the percent of left-handed people would go way up. But when I was born, the percent was 10%, and right now it's 10%. So it hasn't changed one iota. And so it's just you're in a very minority when you're left-handed. But
it was a long number of years. If what I know is correct, before they started making bolt action rifles for left-handed people.
See, I would have it would take me long to figure it out. But I think, and so, left-handed people are a lot of times creative, a lot of times but I think most left-handed people are at least partially ambidextrous. Because so much is for right-handed, you figure it out how to adapt.
Think about it. Cars were all made for right-handed people.
Yeah.
You got people having to shift.
Unless you go to England. You go to England, it wouldn't be.
Well,
it's the opposite. Yeah.
They had their driver's seat on the other side.
Yeah. And so the stick is on that side. There's a race car driver that's in NASCAR right now, Shane Van Gisbergen. And he's from New Zealand, but he's raced. He's like in his mid-30s. He's raced all his life in Australia. The IMSA, I forget what kind of racing it's called, but they do a lot of road type racing. They race anyway. So they do a lot of shifting, but it's all on so his biggest thing he had to figure out when he first started racing here a couple years ago was, wait a second, the gear shifts for the right hand, not the left hand. But yeah, in America it's for right-handers, but you go to England, it'll be for So but like scissors, they do make left-handed scissors now, but I pretty much just use right-handed ones. There's a lot of different things, but you just get used to it because it's just what it was. Now, I guess people complain today, but you do see some people turn that guitar upside down. I never did that when I played guitar. Yeah, but it is what it is. But like I said, I think most left-handed people are somewhat ambidextrous. But needless to say, there was, especially in olden times, there's a little bit of suspicion on someone that's left-handed. That fella ain't quite right. Now, I've heard that a lot about myself for other reasons, but anyway, so left-handed people. But anyway, you can take it forever you want today. You put that on the internet, you'd probably get a lot of attention from it. So anyway, so that's 10, and then you get 11, cast your bread on fun water. But then we get to chapter 12. So he's gone through all these things that are vanity, meaningless. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what kind of house you have. It doesn't matter how many wives you've had. It doesn't matter how good looking you were. It doesn't matter. On and on the list can go, because what's the ultimate conclusion?
Lust.
Dale?
Uh-oh.
That's not one you save for seed.
Look at there. That was good.
That's why.
That was a good one. Yeah, you didn't get it on your box. See?
Share it on the page.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, we've been invaded. So yeah. But we all are going to have the same conclusion: wise, foolish, rich, poor, whatever it may be. We're all going to die one day. So what's important? And that's really how he concludes. Now, like I said, I use this in a sermon series, and so I'm going to end this. So there was a meme going around the internet, and it's still kind of going around, and it talks about, one, going to bed early, two, not leaving my house, and three, not going to a party. And then it says, my childhood punishments have become my adult goals. So, I never would have thought that, some nights it's like, I think I'll just go to bed early tonight, or some nights, it's like, I just want to stay home, and other nights it's like, I'm not going anyway. So, those things, when you're a teenager, those things look like punishments. No, you need to go to bed. I don't want, and so it's funny how life changes. I would hope that we're smarter, wiser as we get older. And so I would hope, I have found most people do have a better sense of their mortality, have a better sense of their spiritual condition. Now, sometimes the bad news is we've become so set in our ways, we won't listen to anything. We have become that 18-year-old, and we're just a lot wiser in our minds. The 18-year-old thinks they know everything, don't they?
Yeah.
And you get, somebody gets in their 70s, they're like, I do know everything. I've lived it. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. And so it's something that we need to understand, that we need to balance the fact that even though we may have a certain level of wisdom, it doesn't mean we know everything, or that we always do the right thing or make the right decision. I've also found that as we get older, I don't know what it is. I guess it's partly our confidence, partly because we don't care as much anymore about what others think. But I have found certain people, like my father-in-law, for example, he used to be so meek, rarely said anything, especially, even if he disagreed or something. And somewhere in these 28 years I've been married to Haley, that has changed. And so he just says what he feels a lot of times now. Well, that does happen. I don't know what there is about that, but I think that aspect's not necessarily bad. I think sometimes we mask what we really feel about something, or what we think sometimes when we're younger. And it seems like when we get older, we don't have that inhibition anymore. We just say it, which is not a bad thing. But like I say, I do think sometimes as we get older, we're like, I know that. You can't teach me anything new on that. And so we really need to look at things with open mind. But the big picture is the way Solomon's going to end this out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream, and appreciate those that watch or will go back and watch. I found some interesting people that have watched these Bible studies, which is interesting to me.